Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be continuing with our beginner level character course on how to create this little monster game character in Blender and then export it into the Unity game engine. In this third installment, we retopologize the sculpted parts of our model so that it's optimized for UV unwrapping, texturing, rigging, and animation. This course is a 9-part series on a game character workflow, and as you can imagine, is a continuation of parts 1 and 2. Link to the playlist should be above or below if you want to jump around. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so let's start with retopologizing the body. Let's select the body object we sculpted in part 2. I've renamed it body HP for high poly, and I'm going to press / on the keyboard for local view. Then with our built-in Blender add-on extra objects we enabled in the edit preferences menu in part 1, let's Shift A and add in a single vertex. Now we have a new object called vert that I'm going to rename body LP for low poly. Just like we did for the eyebrows in part 2, I'm going to go up here and click on the little icon with the magnet to activate snapping. Then clicking on the drop-down menu beside it, I will select face, closest, untick project onto self, and tick project individual elements. Now when I press G and move the single vertex around, it sticks to the body. Over on the modifier panel on the right, I'm going to add in a mirror modifier. Then add in a Shrinkwrap modifier. Change the target to body HP, our high poly sculpted mesh, using the eyedropper. And then finally, let's add in a displace modifier. I'm going to leave the options here for now, as we'll adjust them in a few minutes once we get some geometry down. Okay, so very generally, when retopologizing, you want to maintain quads, which are 4-sided geometry. Also, very generally, I always like to use 8 vertices or faces around any given circular loop of the model in an evenly spaced asterisk-like pattern like this. So let's select the single vertex and then press E to extrude copies around to each point of our pattern like this. When I get to the last one, I'm going to shift select the 2 vertices here and then press F to create an edge. Now, if you want to make things a little easier, you can activate the built-in Blender add-on called F2 in the Edit Preferences menu. With this add-on enabled, when you select a vertex in between 2 others and press F, it automatically creates a quad face. So you can go around the eye like this, creating quads, each time selecting the vertex in the corner. When you reach the end, to connect the last vertex up to the first one to close the loop, you can activate Auto Merge up here. Now when you put the 2 vertices close to each other, they should automatically merge into one. If it doesn't seem to work, like here, you can press N on your keyboard for the Tool Settings panel, go to the Tool tab, expand the Options area, expand the Auto Merge area, and then increase the threshold distance. You may need to experiment here depending on the scale of your model. Here I'm going to go with 0.05 meters. Now when I place the 2 vertices near each other, you'll notice that they automatically become one, which is pretty handy when retopologizing. To make it so that we can see our low poly mesh a little clearer while we work on it, let's go over to the Displace modifier and tick the Edit and Cage buttons here. Now you'll notice that actually made it less clear to see our low poly mesh. To fix this, let's select all the vertices by pressing A, then press Shift N to recalculate the normals so that they are no longer inside out. Now we can see the displacement modifier at work. It is displacing the low poly mesh a given distance. It's being displaced a little too strongly though, so I'm going to reduce the strength a bit so it's sitting closer to the high poly mesh surface. And now we can see our low poly mesh a little more clearly as we work on it going forward. Okay, let's move on to the next loop of the body around the arm. Numpad 3 for side orthographic view. I'm going to draw in the evenly spaced asterisk-like pattern again to act as a guide for our 8 vertices. You'll notice for each loop, I like to have a vertex right in the middle of each of the 4 sides, with a vertex in between each. This is important as retopology is often easier and works best when loops of our model are symmetrical and can line up with each other, as we'll see in just a moment. I'm going to select the eye part we just did, tab into edit mode, select a vertex, and then Shift D to duplicate it. This way we keep all of our modifiers from before, as this is technically still the same object. Let's face up the loop now. I'm going to do a slightly different method here than we did with the eye. I'm going to select this vertex, then E to extrude out. Then I'm going to extrude all the way around, matching each vertex from before. Then F to create an edge to close it up. Now I'm going to select the two vertices here and then press F to make a face. And then just like the eyebrows in part 2, continuing to press F to automatically make faces all the way around. Now let's repeat this exact same process for the horns and legs. 8 vertices around, following the 8 pointed asterisk pattern. Try to keep a vertex in the middle of each of the 4 sides. For the tail loop, Shift D to duplicate a vertex off of the leg. You'll notice as I move the vertex around, it passes through itself and onto the other side. We don't want this as it messes up the symmetry of our object. To keep this from happening, you can turn on the clipping option here under the mirror modifier. Now when the mirrored vertex meets in the middle, it automatically merges. Now for this loop, I'm going to extrude out 11 vertices, which will create 10 faces for us. This one is more than the usual 8, as we will have a couple of extra faces coming from the stomach region later. Then face up the loop with whatever method you prefer. Onto the mouth, I'm going to create 4 vertices from the middle, or 7 across total like this, counting the mirrored side. Then extrude 2 downwards, then 4 vertices back towards the middle to match the top. Then face everything up. Now let's connect some of our loops up. They should hopefully be aligned so that you can just create faces like this in between them. Then press Ctrl R to add a control loop, then play with your scroll wheel until you get 2 control loops. For the top of the head, extrude into the middle, then Ctrl R and add in 2 control loops, or 4 total counting the mirrored side. Between the bottom of the arm and the top of the leg, create 2 faces, and then Ctrl R and add in 4 loops. Then between the legs, just extrude into the middle. Onto the face now, let's extrude 2 faces into the middle, like this. Now I'm going to create what are called poles in topology, which are points with 5 edges coming out of them and not the usual 4. I'm going to create poles at each of the 4 corners of my loop here. When I create a face here between the eye and the mouth, you'll notice that this point here now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges coming out of it, not the usual 4. And again, this is what makes it a pole. Let's create a couple more faces along the bottom. Poles are used to sort of turn your topology. They can sometimes cause pinching in the geometry, so try to keep them to flat areas of your model where things won't deform too much, or areas that won't be seen. Let's extrude a face out like this, and here again you'll notice as I've done that, I've turned this vertex into a pole as well, a vertex with 5 edges coming out of it. Let's link up this face with the top of the arm like this, and then another face above it. Off the top of the nose and eye, I'm going to extrude 2 faces up and connect up to the top of the head, creating our third pole. Now let's fill in this gap we have by creating a face, which again makes this last vertex of the 4 I circled earlier a pole as well. Control R and adding in a control loop here, and then facing everything up to fill in the gap. Moving our way down to the side of the mouth, filling in faces like this. You can see as we have filled in the faces, this vertex at the bottom corner of the mouth is now a pole, which matches a pole we have at the top corner of the mouth, keeping my poles symmetrical. Now just creating a few rows of faces like this along the bottom of the mouth and the stomach. You'll notice here as we get to the leg, we have a pole here. So to keep our poles symmetrical, let's create one on the other side of the front middle vertex here. So selecting this vertex, F to make a face, then again and again until we reach the middle. And now we have made that vertex a pole. Creating another row of faces to the middle, and then you should hopefully be able to face everything up in the gap here and maintain all quad geometry. Now on to connecting up the tail. Let's start in the middle and create a face here, creating another pole which is symmetrical with the one in the front. Then another face. Then a third face, which in turn creates our last symmetrical pole on the leg. Then a fourth face. Then a fifth face. Then a sixth face. You may need to pull some of the vertices of the tail down a bit to reduce any stretching. And then finally a seventh face connecting up to the tail. I'm going to create an eighth face here, but this time I'm going to go upwards and now selecting this vertex here, F to make a couple of faces towards the middle of the body. Now creating faces, working my way up the side. Creating a symmetrical pole on the bottom of the horn here with the ones in the front. Now let's fill in some of the back here, creating rows of faces towards the middle like this. Now I'm going to extrude a face up to match up with this vertex on the horn here. And then now let's connect up to the top of the head. And then now let's fill in the gap we have. Let's cap off the top of the horn base, creating faces around right up to the edge of the horn base like this. Sometimes the auto merge threshold is too low, so I sometimes just select two vertices like this and then press M for the merge menu. This might be Alt M for you depending on the Blender version. Okay, now to cap off the horn, I'm going to select the side vertex here in the middle and then one on either side of it, then E to extrude inwards, then over to the other vertex in the middle on the other side of the horn base, then one on either side of it and extrude in, then face up in between. Control R to add a control loop, and then face up the sides and you should have quads everywhere. Now onto the eye. Alt left click to select the edge loop, then E and S to extrude and scale inwards a couple of times. Then I'm going to do the same technique to cap off the inside of the eye. Select the vertex in the middle, then one on either side of it, and extrude in. Then do the same on the other side. Face up in between them. Add a control loop, and then face up the gaps on the sides. Then the same thing for the mouth. Try if you can to keep all of the vertices evenly spaced. For the tail, I'm going to select the fifth vertex from the center, which is the middle vertex of the tail loop. Then select the vertex on either side of it and extrude a couple of times towards the end. Then creating rows of faces to wrap the tail. Once that is done, select the fifth vertex from the center again, and use the similar capping technique as before, extruding into the middle, creating edge loops, and filling in the gaps with the quads. Okay, onto the arm. Let's extrude some faces out, and then wrap the arm with rows of faces. Nothing fancy. Then to the leg, same thing, just wrapping the leg with rows of faces. Okay, back to the hand. I'm going to create loops of 8 vertices like we did before around the base of the fingers. Like we did before, place a vertex in the middle of each of the 4 sides of the finger, then face everything up and complete the loop. Repeat for the other fingers. Again, keep a vertex in the middle of each of the 4 sides. This is important as it will make it easier when we connect it all up. Okay, with that done, let's extrude a couple of faces up and then create rows of faces to wrap the finger. Then use the same capping technique as we did before for the fingertip. Select the vertex in the middle of the side here, then one on either side, extrude in, then flip over to the other side of the finger and do the same thing, extrude in, face up in between, Control R to add a control loop, then face up the gaps with quads. You should have an edge loop that goes through the middle of the fingertip now and down each side. Now, like we did for the body, let's connect the fingers up. Make sure to match up the vertex in the middle of each of the sides and then create two faces like this. Then Control R to add a control loop. You should be able to Alt left click the middle edge loop like this and have it run through all of the fingers. Now let's connect up the middle vertex of the thumb to the middle vertex of the arm. Control R for one control loop. Connect up along the bottom of the arm as well. Control R for one control loop to maintain symmetry with the top. If you Alt left click this middle edge, hopefully you have one nice edge loop running along the entirety of the whole body like this. Now let's work on the palm and back of the hand. On the bottom of the hand, I'm going to add in one control loop here and then 3 on this side. Then I'm going to create some rows of faces around the whole hand. When you press Control R, you should see a clean, singular loop going around the hand and arm like this. If they are spiraling all over the place, it's not the end of the world, but it's generally better for animation to keep the topology clean. Then some more faces off the bottom of the thumb, on the back here, and then on the palm. Two more faces on the palm like this. We created a few pulls here, you may have noticed, on the corners of the fingers. We will want to make sure we have 4 poles at each corner like we did for the eyes, mouth, arms, legs, and horns. More faces on the back of the hand to keep things symmetrical. Control R to check that my loops are still clean and not getting out of control. Now to help fill in this gap we have, I'm going to add in 2 control loops here like this, one on the top and one on the bottom of the middle edge. Now let's create faces down and around like this. And then hopefully you have 2 quads left you can fill in the gap like this. Then to match the front on the back, let's add in 2 control loops, one on the top and one on the bottom of the middle edge. And then same thing as before, create 2 rows of quads like this and then fill in the gap. Now for the foot, let's create faces down the top and around the front of the big toe. Control R to add in a control loop, then extruding out to the side towards the little toe, and then creating a quad face here like this to sort of cap off the front of the foot. To see things a little easier, you can press Alt-B to set a view region. Now on the other side for symmetry, I'm going to extrude a face out and then create a quad face here as well. Control R for a control loop to get a little bit more control over the shape here. Then extruding faces around the bottom edge, making sure to match the vertices running along the top edge. Extruding another row of faces around. And now let's just fill in the gap. And Control R for a little bit better of a shape. Okay, so for the sole of the foot, let's select the middle edge loop here, running down the top of the foot. And then similar to the capping technique as before, let's extrude a couple of faces out. Then create quad faces on either side. Now create a couple more quads to match the ones we have along the sides, then face up the gaps. Now to cap off the heel here, extrude 2 more faces like this, then connect it up to the edge here. And then you should have 2 quads left to fill in and finish off the foot. Alt-B to clear the view region, and that's it for the body. Now let's move on to the horns. Like we did for the body, I'm going to rename the sculpted horn HP for high poly, then Shift A and add in a single vertex and name it horn LP for low poly. Then selecting the single vertex over on the modifier panel, adding in a mirror modifier, a Shrinkwrap modifier with the target set to horn HP, and then a displacement modifier with the strength set to 0.2 and the edit and cage buttons turned on. Make sure snap to face is still on, and then positioning the first vertex in the middle of the front side of the horn. Extruding out, and then extruding vertices around to match the 8 we just made, and then F all the way around to create faces. You may find that when you create the faces with the displacement modifier on, you can't see the low poly object. This is because it is inside out like before, so select all the vertices and press Shift N to recalculate the normals. Now it's just a matter of extruding faces up towards the end. and then creating rows of faces around to wrap the horn. Then using the same capping technique as before, select the middle vertex of one of the sides, then one on either side, extrude in, then flip over to the other side and do the same. Face up in between, add a control loop, then face in the gaps. And then the same thing along the bottom. Hopefully you are an expert now at these techniques and it's easy peasy now. Okay, let's smooth the topology out a little bit. I'm going to delete the displacement modifier as we don't need it anymore. You'll notice as I tab into edit mode, our low poly mesh is sort of a little bit messy. The vertices and edges are a little bit crooked. This is fine for the most part, but typically topology works the best when things are more evenly spaced and less crooked. If you wanted to really make the topology cleaner, select your low poly mesh, tab into edit mode, and then right click and select smooth vertices. When I press Alt-Z for X-ray mode and then press Shift-R to repeat the last operation, in this case the smooth vertices operation, you can see each time I press it, the vertices get closer, but at the same time become more evenly spaced, neater, and straighter, which is great. The problem we have now though is the vertices have collapsed in too much. To fix this, let's apply our Shrinkwrap modifier. To make this work, make sure only the Shrinkwrap modifier is on the object. So I'm just going to apply the mirror modifier first. Sometimes I find that changing the wrap method to project and then ticking the negative and positive boxes works the best here. Now when you apply the modifier, it sets the position of the smooth vertices to the surface of the high poly object. This leaves you with a low poly object with smoother, more evenly spaced vertices than before, which are sitting right on the surface of the high poly object, which in turn will give us a better shape. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing with the body to smooth out the topology just a bit. You can see on the back we have some vertices and faces that are a little bit scrunched in relation to the others and are a tiny bit crooked. Select the low poly object, delete the displacement modifier, then apply the mirror modifier. Then on the Shrinkwrap modifier, change the wrap method to project and make sure both the positive and negative boxes are checked. Now tab into edit mode. A to select all, then right click and select smooth vertices. Shift R to repeat the smooth operation a few times and really smooth everything out. Then when you're happy, over to the shrink wrap and let's apply it and have all the vertices wrap onto the surface of the high poly mesh. Now your low poly body mesh should be a little bit more evenly spaced and tidier. To get the detail that we sculpted back, let's select the low poly mesh and over on the modifier panel, let's add in a multi-resolution modifier. Then click the subdivide button a few times to get more detail. Then let's add in a shrink wrap modifier again with the target set to the high poly sculpted object. Then again, I like to set the wrap method to project and tick both the negative and positive boxes. Now we have our sculpted detail back on our low poly mesh. And then you can do the same thing for the horns as well. And that's it for this video. The eyes, eyebrows, teeth, and tongue are relatively straightforward to retopologize, or you can just leave them as is, as they are pretty low poly already anyways. I'll leave that up to you, and I'm gonna call part 3 done. In the next video, in part 4, we will UV unwrap the character so it's optimized for texture painting, which we will do in part 5. Couple quick shoutouts. Shout out to Nusco Didlito Water Linguini on Twitter, who is a 3D artist from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, who finished off the bear tutorial and added in the famous donut to complete the scene. I love it. Check out his live stream on Twitch. And to Nick Thoughtsipple on Instagram, who is only on day 13 of learning Blender, and for his first sculpt, finish off the Let's Sculpt a Bus series. I love the hair, Nick. Great job to both of you guys. Thanks again for the shoutouts. Feel free to ask questions below. I try and answer all of them, and sometimes I actually help. If you want to share your art or ask a question, I have a little group on Facebook going. Link is below. Or you can just hit me up on social media somewhere. I love seeing your guys' stuff. I have Twitter, Instagram, Discord, and Twitch as well. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I hope it helped, and see you in the next one.